I'm going to try to do something today, guys, that I feel like is going to help a lot of people. That's the goal, at least. You know how all of the time we talk about how you don't have to choose like the best thing in terms of marketing. You don't have to choose the best channel. You just have to choose something that's like good enough and then do that thing.
Yes.
So I think that that's the right advice. But there's kind of something missing there.
Hmm.
How do you choose what that good enough thing is?
Hmm. There you go.
And then once you choose that, how are you comfortable enough not jumping to something else? Like you kind of have defined it as like there's probably better things than this, but this is good enough for me. That's a pretty hard space to be in to say, okay, but I'm not even going to look for anything better at this point.
Yep.
It's kind of a hard situation to be in. And so what I'm going to attempt to do today is give you a process for figuring that out and for being okay with whatever you choose because it's going to be your experiment on yourself. Before I do that, I'm going to tell you a whole bunch of stories. Ren, unfortunately, already ate his cookies today because this would be a great episode for him to eat some cookies because it's going to be me talking most of it. But what'd you say about the woman who you're with is a cookie fetish or something? What was that?
I said nothing of the sort. But
You're trying
10
to get
minutes
him in
from now,
trouble.
yeah, 10 minutes from now, I'll be in the pantry looking for snacks. I guarantee you that. I'll have a camera error, uh, and you'll hear me say, "I'm still here, guys. The camera went out," and then you'll hear papers rustling.
When the pandemic first started, South Park did a pandemic episode, which got really, really like every South Park episode. The premise was really, really funny, and then like 5 or 10 minutes in, it got just completely idiotically stupid. But which is like not necessarily a bad thing. But the first scene from the episode, you should go look up. It's really funny. It's a song that Cartman makes up about how he loves the pandemic.
Really?
And part of it is like him doing homeschooling with COVID, and he just pretends that his Zoom clicks out. And he's like, eh, 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 eh. And then he takes this photo of himself doing exactly that, puts it in front of his picture,
That and he
and then
leaves a
just
little
plays video
freeze.
games.
That's a good plan for this podcast for me today, John. Thank you for that.
It's a good
That's what I
plan for this
needed to know.
podcast.
Yeah,
So a
absolutely.
lot of so first off, I mean, some of these stories we have told before on the podcast, but in different kind of context. And so I'm going to bring them all together here in this one, and then there's some news stories and stuff like that, and then it's going to end with this kind of experiment with this process that I think is really going to help you. Um, so I'm going to start with the story of the speaker who told this remarkable, this inspirational story of this podcaster who, against all odds, made it big. Right, this guy, a sales coach, he had 50 listeners in his first year. He kept at it, even though supposedly he could only afford barely afford his tiny apartment, like as the story goes. But by year 5, he had 500 listeners, and then in year 7, he had 1 million downloads. And what grit, what testament to believing in oneself, to doing the work, to pushing through against all odds, right? And it is. But also, the dude worked for free for 6 years, and yeah, it worked out for him. That's why we're talking about him. But it also might not have, because for most people, it doesn't. And even though it did, if you think about it, would you be willing to do what he did in order to have what he has? Maybe you would. Maybe you'd be willing to invest 1,500 hours over 6 years in the hopes that by year 7, you'd have a podcast with 1 million downloads. If you're already successful, it's something you enjoy doing as a side project, that's great. It's not a bad choice of something to do. Right? We're investing a ton of time into this podcast. It's very much like on the side of a successful business. We're not depending on this podcast to build a successful business. Right? I don't think anybody's crazy. I don't think it's a bad choice. But you can't justifiably desire what others have, I think, unless you're willing to do what they've done to have it. So personally, I applaud the dude. At the same time, there's no way in hell that I'd be willing to do what he did. Now, regardless of where you stand on whether you want to do that or not do that or whatever it is, here's what matters. Okay? His story was shared because it's remarkable. It was remarked upon because it was an outlier event. Success stories are visible. Failures are invisible. Overly optimistic thinking and correlation causation errors, they're the result of all of this. So in our podcaster's example, if you think about the costs involved, there's the cost of time invested, but more importantly, there's the opportunity cost of what he was not doing during that time. Because it worked out against all odds, he's both admired and celebrated, and like justifiably so. His story's super inspirational. Now, does this mean that the secret to success is to start a podcast with no business and no audience, record it in your one-bedroom apartment for 6 years, and hope that at the end of it all, you'll become a famous podcaster? I don't think so. I'm not so convinced. Because there's a lot of people during that same amount of time that took significantly less risk and had more obvious upsides that were more successful in that same 6-year period than him. Many much, much more so. The reason that we hear the story of the podcaster and not the others, though, is that the others who had more success in that same time period, their success was much more predictable. They made good decisions with reliable outcomes. And when you make good decisions with reliable outcomes and things work out exactly as they should, it's not exactly New York Times bestseller material. This is something called survivorship basis. It assumes that success tells the whole story and ignores past failures. Nobody speaks on stage about people who make bad decisions, take insane risks, fail miserably, and live their lives as abject failures in beds of their own making. I wouldn't go to that talk, would you?
Oh, I would read that book, but I also like the Darwin Award books, so, you know.
Well, but isn't that interesting? Is I actually think that there should be more books written about failures.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that there's actually much more to learn from failures than there is from winners. But there aren't a lot of books written about people who have failed miserably either.
And not stayed in failure, because there's no upside, there's no character arc. It's not entertaining enough for the general public.
Well, so I talk about that a little bit later on in this, which I'm going to hit on. But like, life isn't a story.
Right.
But in order to talk about life, we have to tell a story.
Right.
Which means we have to create a narrative, which means we have to smooth out the edges, which means we have to perhaps find steps that weren't there or causations that weren't there. Right? So you actually hit the nail on the head there. So, all of this to say, there might be a lot to learn from outliers, but I think that it's a mistake to expect similar results from doing the same things as them. Curated selections of successful stories skews our reality. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with listening to outlier stories, to inspirational stories. But I think we need to understand that that's what they are and look at them as that. And, maybe take some advice from them, but don't necessarily take some advice from them. Against all odds, stories of overcoming get shared as gospel. If he can do it, so can you. And inspiration is wonderful. It's quite useful. But what's also useful is the awareness that being surprised something works is a bad thing. The only reason we're hearing about our hero's story is that their success was unexpected. The odds were stacked against them. A 95% chance of failure still comes with a 5% chance of success, after all. Business books celebrate outliers. It's exciting to read about the few who ignore conventional advice, who eschew norms, who take crazy risks and still win. The more unexpected the success, the bigger the outlier, the better the story. Routine fundamentals result in boringly predictable good outcomes. It shouldn't be surprising when something works. It should be expected. Like, think about it. Would you read this book? If this was the premise of a book, would you read it? So-and-so woke up, they went pee, they drank a coffee, they fed the kids, they took them to school, they exercised, they drank another coffee, They executed on a few well-selected daily tasks. They ate their veggies. They read a book. They said, I love you to his wife. He never forgot to say, I love you to his wife. Then he went to bed. He followed this routine more or less on repeat for 10 years. It worked for him. It'll work for you too. It's a terrible story. Sounds like a pretty great life. And so I think about all of these things and how they come together, and I think about what's missing all of the time. These days, I'm not looking so much at what's there. I'm most often looking at what's missing. So that same event, okay? Now, but a different speaker. So this time, it was a woman who had a fabulous business. And so on stage, she showed 4 different marketing systems in 45 minutes. Each was well thought out. There was content, email, lead generating content, marketing materials, 3 different programs, each with their own marketing funnel. It was impressive, but I couldn't help looking around the room at the attendees' glazed over eyes, imagining they were thinking the same thing as me. If I've got to do all this shit just to make a living, yo, count me out. And it wasn't just her. Many of the speakers, both men and women, had similar presentations. There had to be something that I was missing, and so I started to look at what was missing, like what was going on here, right? And then I asked the question to myself. I didn't ask anybody else, but I was like, how many of these speakers have children? And so I counted. And of the 15 speakers at the event, I was keynoting the event, so I didn't include myself. So of the other 15 speakers at the event, 2 of them had children. So 2 out of 15 had children. Their average age was 37 years old. And of those 2, only one of them had children while they built the bulk of their business. So basically, they built a successful business without kids and then had kids afterwards, right? Now, the guy I was sitting next to when I was listening to this woman on stage, for example, he had 3 kids under the age of 5. Now, did the fact that the speakers didn't have children render their information invalid or their success any less credible? Not at all. Not at all. Still, this single missing data point, I think, provides a lot of necessary context. Like, it doesn't mean that there isn't anything valid there, but holy crap, that's an important data point, isn't it? And I'm sure that there's a lot more that's missing that are pretty important data points, aren't there? So if you're a guy with 3 kids under the age of 5, listening to somebody on stage talk about their 3 different marketing funnels for their 3 different programs and all of their different content and lead generating and nurturing content and conversion content and all this kind of stuff, and you're like, how the hell can I do that? How do people do this? It's like, well, it's not necessary for a certain kind of success. It's necessary to do what that person is doing, which may not be the right thing for you to be doing. That's why what's missing is important. There's always a silent side to these inspirational stories, and it's up to us to be skeptical sleuths and think about what's not being said. What we often discover is that what's missing gives us the context we need to decide how relevant what was included is for us. Before we move on, anything you guys want to talk about in any of that?
Yeah, did you say silent science or silent sci? So there's always a silent science to these stories. To these
silent side. There's always a silent side.
Okay. All right. Okay.
To inspirational stories.
I couldn't pick that out. But I love that you went from silent side to skeptical to skeptical. I can't remember. There was a lot of S in it. Yeah, skeptical. Yeah, silent side, skeptical sleuth. I like that. I have nothing to comment about it other than I like that the words were those words. You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you.
We hear this from students all the time, right? They get so frustrated because I'm doing just like whatever person, and like, no, you're not. There's way more to that story than you know that you just don't happen to know.
I mean, let's call it what it is sometimes too in our industry. Like, you're doing exactly what that person is doing. They're really good looking.
Right.
Like, they're the way that they're putting pictures up of themselves, you know, maybe it works for them, at least in part, because they're really, really good looking. Not all because of that, but That's
it
a data
helps.
point. That helps.
Yeah.
You don't have to look far in any research anywhere
Mm-hmm.
to see that good-looking people, men and women, unfortunate, I'm not saying it's fair, get more opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or they've been doing it longer. They happen to be doing the right thing at the right time, and that thing doesn't work now, but it did then, and it led them to where they are now. And there's just so many different things
Some
that
people
I
are
understand
just
why everybody's frustrated, but
some people are just categorically better at some things than you are as a human. Like, let's put that out there too. Like,
they're magnetic.
they're magnetic. I talk to students about things like, hey, you probably need to do a live broadcast. And then I see the live broadcast and I think to myself, this isn't a skill issue that will improve over time with experience. You're just not interesting in that way to listen to.
Yeah.
And that's not going to, so we got to find, you need another pillar. Because some people are just better at some things. It's what it is.
I think you can go. I do think that natural attributes absolutely play a role.
It's part
Think
of it,
about
at
that one
least.
person you know where it's super annoying, where you'll always be out with them, and for some reason, it just like magnetically the room turns to them over the course of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't even explain it.
Yes.
But there's something about that. I think that you can go from bad to good in just about anything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that you can go from good to great in everything.
Yep.
And I think that, as we're going to talk about at the end of this, I think that you really only can do one or two things. And I think it's pretty important to choose wisely. And yeah, choose the thing that aligns well with you. And part of that is actually going to be trying basically everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about that cadence of trying it and like kind of ranking yourself in it and saying, this felt good, this didn't feel good, but we'll get to that. But yeah, man, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You're just not that good at that thing. Fine. Great. I'm not that good at video. I think I could be good. I think with a lot of work, I think that I could be a decent YouTuber.
Mm-hmm.
I think with that same amount of work, I could be a world-class writer. Now, I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I'm going to be there for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But you bet your ass I'm going to try. And that's just a matter of choosing your lane. And a lot of what I do when I choose other media, like the media, like what we're doing right now, is I'm workshopping a book. Like, that's why this podcast exists. Like this isn't a podcast. This is a book. Because the book is the main thing. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have other things supporting your thing. But there does need to be a thing. I like that you brought that up, man.
I don't even know what I said.
Glad you didn't eat your Twizzlers.
I'm on a sugar rush right now. I'll be crashing soon, so you go ahead.
This is like, I did some physical activity for the first time in a week today.
Oh, no.
Like very light physical activity. Like I raked up some grass and put it in a bag. And after about 20 minutes, I just looked at Alice and I was like, I gotta stop. Like,
wiped out.
Man, my body just sucks right now. Oh, jeez. Well, and we got Calvin's birthday party tomorrow, so there's going to be like 60 people here. Yeah, it's going to be super fun. It's actually really, really fun. So Allison did this. Allison has this whole quest thing that she designed. And so there's Calvin coins. There's Mochi. His middle name's Mochi. So there's Calvin coins, Mochi medals, and Goodman gold.
That's so cute.
And everybody gets a wand. And there's, I think, 7 different stations where you complete a quest, and you get one of the coins or medallions or gold or pieces of gold, and then everybody who comes to the party brings like a pre-loved toy or book or something like that, and they put it in Calvin's great chest, and so she built like this chest thing, And then when you finish all the quests, you get to trade in your coins, and you get to choose one of the pre-loved.
All right, y'all better be posting pictures. I need to see this.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
It's benefit of young parents. My parents were old. They didn't do it. They weren't creative at all. They're like, hey, here's a trash.
They didn't have Pinterest either, though, and like social media pressure.
Right.
Nah, Allison's just crafty. Like, she just lives for this stuff. So she actually got a job. She hasn't worked yet, but she actually got a job, and she's going to be teaching arts and crafts. Like, I think she's doing knitting, but she's going to be teaching knitting at this organization. I think it's once a week. They're paying her $40 an hour to adults with special needs.
Awesome.
I love it.
That's the best. Okay.
Clone people. We need to start with
Let's
her.
move on.
You got very lucky with Allison. So doctor, obviously she's super hot, and then like giving and like thoughtful and crafty, and don't screw that up.
I just go straight to the music.
Problem is that
she's an R&B music connoisseur.
Energy. She is an R&B music connoisseur.
That's
you should see the sex playlist that we have.
Start there.
All of the energy, though, all of that energy used to be directed towards me. It was like massages, it was sandwiches, it was everything. Then we had those stinking kids, and now they get all of it, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I just want my feet rubbed. And
forget about that, John.
You can reach.
Right. God gave you hands.
Let's move on. So, from 1995 to 2018, Monster Beverage, purveyors of only the finest sugar-filled neon-colored caffeine bombs, was one of the best-performing NASDAQ stocks. So if you invested $10,000 into Monster in 1995, you'd have over $30 million in 2018. So in that time, the stock increased over 300,000%.
Damn.
Imagine what it must have been like owning that stock during its mediocre rise, right? Every day you'd open up the newspaper, you'd be smiling at the bucket of money you yet again made. You tell your boss to suck it when you quit your unfulfilling job. You'd make love to your wife in the middle of the day. You can only go back in time, right?
Oh.
Here's what's missing. During Monster's Meteoric
is the word you're looking
Meteoric,
for.
yes.
I knew that.
That's what it says on the page. I just can't read. During Monster's, what's the word, Ren?
Meteoric
rise. Its stock traded below its previous high 95% of your time. Get yourself a friend like an MC Tuk Tuk, okay? Y'all need one of these guys. They're the best.
Back up, Tuk Tuk.
Four separate times, the stock lost 50% of its value.
Oh, no.
So think about that. Its stock traded below its previous high 95% of the time. And 4 separate times it lost 50% of its value. Now, I'm not a finance guy. Backstory, when people used to ask me why I became a personal trainer, what I jokingly tell them was that the guidance counselor in high school used to ask me to count to 12, and I'd lose count at 7 and a total of 3 more. So she just handed me a clipboard, a pair of sweatpants, and said, have at it. So if you're also not a finance guy, here's what this all means. The literal best performing stock of the past 2 decades appeared to be failing 95% of the time. According to finance journalist Morgan Housel, this is what he said. He said, what now looks like a slam dunk story was, at any given time in the last 20 years, an easy story to criticize. So no telling your boss to suck it, no quitting your unfulfilling job, no daytime lovemaking. You could still do that, I guess, but it would have been unrelated. None of that. Owning the stock would have been wrapped with doubt, with worry. There's no free lunch in any of this. Even if you got lucky or somehow knew ahead of time, 95%, or even if you got lucky or somehow knew ahead of time in 1995 that humans were really, really going to love ingesting sugar-filled neon-colored caffeine bombs, like, there's still no free lunch. So you've got to embrace this kind of unpredictability is one of the main lessons to this. There's this New Yorker cartoonist and essayist. His name is Tim Kreider. It's one of my favorite writers. And what he said is, Life is an adventure, not a test. There are no correct answers in the back of the book. We don't get to find out what was behind door number 2. We never even know whether we won. If you want some guarantee that everything will turn out all right, then you'll have no regrets. It's not an adventure you want. It's a theme park. Because here's the thing. Good decisions don't always work out. There's too much luck involved. Let's say that a great decision that you make has a 70% chance of working. Okay, you'll never know that, but let's say that you make a really good decision that has a 70% chance of knowing. That's absolutely insane odds, by the way. Like insane odds. Like the best investors in the world, the best decision makers on the planet have about a 60% chance of being right. Right? Just for context. Still, if you have a 70% chance of something working, 3 out of 10 times it's going to fail. The secret to success isn't to wait and try to get it perfect. It's to skew the odds in your favor and to show up long enough and often enough for them to even themselves out so that good things happen. So as the saying goes, hindsight's 20/20. History is a habit of smoothing out the edges, though. Steve Jobs said, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in the future. Nothing is as simple as history makes it seem. Now, storytellers aren't liars. Their memories just aren't very good. My memory stinks too. So does yours. Our brains just aren't equipped to comprehend our world's complexity. In response, we smooth out the edges, we create patterns that just don't exist. Because real life isn't a story. But in order for real life to be communicated, this is what we talked about, it needs to be wrapped up into a story. When we post-rationalize, we can create narratives and cause and effect relationships that don't exist. Now, Monster isn't the exception, it's the rule. Netflix stock price increased 35,000% from 2002 to 2018. It also traded below its previous high on 94% of those days. Amazon lost 90% of its value from 2000 to 2002. On September 3rd, 2020, Apple lost $180 billion in company value. The correct lesson to take from any outlier is that their success is not a straight line. It's a goddamn roller coaster run by some carny chugging chocolate milk in the sun. Most of the time when you're going forward, it's going to feel like you're moving backwards. Worst yet, it'll feel like you're the only one. But if it's any consolation, others are going to feel the same thing as you too. They're too close to their own thing too. What's often missing from success stories is how little success it actually feels like all along the way. Let's pause there before we move on.
Yeah, I would have sold all that stock.
You want to what?
I would have sold all that stock. Especially at the time. Understanding what I understand about it now, I get how the long game is played and how you maintain the habit almost irrelevant to what the indicators are at the time. It's just a smarter way to play a long-term investment. But back then, no way in hell. Thing dipped a little bit. I'd taken my $5 out of there, buddy.
Take my $5.
Yeah,
going
get my
home for some
$5.
afternoon delight.
Yeah. Have some non-monster sex in the daytime because the stock's not trading.
That is a unique sentence that has probably never been spoken into existence until now.
I feel like monster sex would be some farty sex, though.
Yeah, probably so. It's like that Family Guy episode where they go to that theme park and then the baby lets the farts out of the car. He's like, I'm freeing the car farts, bro. All you car farts, you're free to go. And the one looks back and is like, no, go to the woods. You're free now.
You do the voice way too well. It's like disturbing. I'm going to send you a request to like say random things in his voice just to send it to friends to annoy them.
Some of them I can do it, some of them I can't. But I love the concept of not being so fixated on the immediate success of whatever it is you're doing, man. Because gosh, we coach that all the time. It's just a constant in our interactions with our students. And I guess it's a social media thing too. People were probably a lot more tolerant back then, probably because of the lack of social media.
What's funny to me too is that when you have a moment of success and you're like, ah, I figured it out. And then boom, everything
Nope.
changes and you just have to start all over.
Nope.
Because that's what I feel like with Nate. Like, okay, I finally figured out something that works for him. And then it's working for like a week. And then everything, what worked does not work anymore all of a sudden. And so the same thing happens. And so that's what's so frustrating about all of this is like, great, I had a challenge that worked. And then you run it again and you're like, why am I hearing crickets? Like, let's, and so.
Yeah.
Nothing. That's so true. It's frustrating.
So one of there's this analogy called the paper towel analogy. Have you guys heard about this?
Mm-mm.
Never heard of it.
So you said you did? You didn't?
No, never heard of it. Never heard of the paper towel analogy.
Okay. It's
Never.
good. It's a really good analogy. So the process of achieving anything meaningful can be so agonizingly slow that you'd wonder whether it's happening at all. Go to the gym, have the best workout of your life, eat perfect that day, wake up the next morning, look in the mirror, nothing's different. Do it again, look in the mirror the next day, nothing's different. Do that for 2 weeks, look in the mirror again, nothing's different. Like, it's just the way it is. Slowness is completely normal. It doesn't help our mindset, though. So the paper towel analogy does a good job of putting hard to see positive movement into perspective. So imagine that every positive action, you rip off a sheet of paper towel. Technically, every sheet is equal. But it doesn't seem that way. Because when the roll's new, it's fat. And so 3 to 4 sheets go around the roll. And so removing one sheet when the roll is new doesn't do that much. You don't even go all the way around at once. But as you keep going, as long as you keep going, the roll gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And each sheet you remove over time appears to have more of an impact.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get near the end of the roll, one sheet might go around the thing 4 times. That last sheet looks like it gave you 4 times the results of the first sheet.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, the results are actually the same. The only thing that's different is your perspective. Success isn't linear. It's never straight up and down or straight up to the right. Instead, it's up, up, down, down, up, down, all the way around, right? But compounding is always happening. We're always ripping off these pieces of paper towel. So in being consistent over time, what happens is you actually become the outlier. And this is the part that I want to hammer in. One of the hardest things to do, we'll call it the outlier trait, is to be consistently good. It's human nature to jump from exciting new thing to exciting new thing. It's hard to stick to a routine of getting up at 5 a.m. to write a book. It's easy to jump from trend to trend, focusing on whatever in vogue social media short form content is trendy. It's easy to do that. Focusing on good helps you keep doing the work that matters. Searching for the best leaves you hopping from tactic to tactic. Mm-hmm. Quitting and starting over because you think you found a better way is a recipe for failure. So according to the podcaster Steph Smith, she says, in reality, so long as you, number 1, choose your daily actions wisely, and number 2, consistently execute over time, good things will reliably happen. Mm-hmm. The hard part, though, to me, isn't choosing your actions, it's sticking to them. Because once initial excitement wears off and the day-to-day routine sits in, boredom often leads to procrastination, which leads to a search for a better way. When you consider how much actual time it takes to do what you need to do in a day, it's actually quite small the amount of time it takes to do basically anything that's meaningful. Couple examples. Writing 500 words a day will take you 30 minutes to an hour. Do that for 3.5 months, you'll have the first draft of a 50,000 word book. 3 hours of exercise a week is enough to reduce your risk of heart disease, depression, weight gain, diabetes, certain types of cancers, and premature death. That's 1.8% of your time. In every field, the examples are similar. The impactful tasks actually take a tiny percentage of the time. Most of the rest of your time is probably filled with notifications, interruptions, or things we're not quite sure we should do, but think maybe we should do. A vision means that you know what to do each day and what not to do. With a vision, you'll feel free to shut off with your loved ones, ending with a good night's sleep, devoid of a nagging existential feeling that there's something you should have done. Not doing something that isn't worth doing is a wonderful way to spend your time. So, all of this brings me to the $1 million question. How the fuck do you figure out what to do?
Is that the new title for this episode?
Sure.
I like it.
I can't put it on the book, so.
No, there you go.
This
That'd
is a
actually be
huge
good title for a
problem.
book.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be a great title for a book. How the fuck do you figure out what to do?
That's a good title for a book.
That'd be like a job search book or something.
Mm.
Probably for millennials. I don't even know what
Hey.
millennials.
Hey,
You said
you're
it
an
was
elder
such,
millennial, so
You're right. You said it with such contempt, like he's my age.
mm-hmm. Self-hatred.
I reserve the right to have that much contempt for millennials, sir. You be nice to the other youngster here. And for God's sake, get off my lawn. Jesus.
So step one is to have a period of time where you're rapidly testing things. And to set aside and say, this period of time is my time to rapidly test things. Mm-hmm. Now, you can make a list of all of the things you feel like you should be doing or ideas that you might have. But know you can only choose one of them. So write yourself a list. You're going to do an experiment and you're going to study yourself with these things, right? It might be start a podcast. It might be go on YouTube. It might be Instagram. It might be knock on doors on your street. Like, it could be any of these things. It could be all of these things. It could be other things. Okay? The important thing, though, is to rapidly test. Because if you're only testing once a month, you can only test 12 things in a year. Mm-hmm. If you're only testing one a year, well, obviously, I think that you should test once every 1 to 2 weeks. And so, after each test, you're going to answer 3 questions. Did I enjoy this? Do I feel like I could get good at this? If I were to continue this for a year, would I be in a better place than I am right now? That's it. It's that simple. Once you've found something that you can answer yes to all 3 questions, you are done. You've found it. And because it's your experiment, you've given yourself permission to ignore trending stuff that inevitably pops up and distracts. One more story. So it was the final day of one of those 3-day marketing events. I don't know if you haven't been to any of these things, these like fancy dancy, like stupid jerky marketing events. Every single guy seems to be wearing the same like standard marketing guy apparel, which is dark blue jeans, white V-neck shirt, blazer, pre-faded leather satchel they got from Banana Republic. And so the final speaker at this event was Michael Gerber, who wrote the E-Myth. And he was different. He big smile, big gray beard, and just a straw hat, and he had this old-fashioned handheld mic. And I've come to accept now that any speaker who walks onto stage with a handheld mic, I immediately respect, because like you've been around for a while, right? So he was silent for a few seconds. He walked onto the stage. He was silent for a few seconds. He was the last speaker of the event at the end of 3 days, right? And he took in the crowd. This was in a like a big auditorium kind of room. And he took in the crowd and he said, "Now I just got here, so I didn't see any of the other speakers, but I can guess what they did. I bet they all had some nice looking PowerPoint and a fancy acronym outlining some systems that'll solve all your problems that you can learn more about if you buy their book in the lobby." Finally, some honesty, right? So I sat forward in my chair when he said that. And then he continued. And he said, "I don't have any of those things. The truth is, I'm just making it up as I go. Always have. Don't you realize you can too?" So after 3 days of talks with all these famous speakers sharing their steps to success, fucking Lewis Howes reading off your phone, that was the most useless hour of my life. Gerber's lesson is the only one that I remember. To date, It is the most impactful lesson anybody has ever shared with me. What you choose to do doesn't have to be the best. You'll never know if it is anyway. Remember, the dots can only be connected looking backwards. What's important is that it's good. Once you've found your good, stop looking. There might be better. But the compounding only begins when you start, and it stops when you quit. The worst thing that you can do is stop and start again. Starting sucks. Don't start if you don't have to. Holy crap, don't start if you don't have to. The sooner you start, the closer you'll be to where you want to go. Consistently searching for better delays the process. Find your good, close the book, the metaphorical book, close that shit, and execute. Because there's no straight path to success. It's messy. Memory's deceiving because it smooths out the edges. Outliers get attention because what they did works for them. Just remember that we don't hear about all the time it doesn't work for others, though. And while there might be a capital B best way to do something, never forget that there's also seemingly infinite lowercase ge good enough ways that'll work just fine. And yeah, you can make it up as you go too.
So that might be my favorite part of the book so far. And then also the ending was really good dating advice too. Huh?
The whole like chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Good, because holy crap, that was hard to write.
It's my favorite part so far.
It's like. I mean, thank you. That's really nice to hear. How do you like? It's somewhat non-obvious or counterintuitive, and it's hard to communicate stuff like that and not be, but not dwell on it. Like it's hard to communicate stuff like that and add the context that you need to and add the storytelling that you need to, but not say way too much and like drone on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's the part that nobody wants to hear, right? Nobody wants to hear you are not the unique individual that you hope to be, right? Like maybe something happens, right? But for the most part, assume that you are not an outlier. You are the rule. And if it happens, fantastic, but don't make that the goal necessarily. So I think nobody wants to hear that. Well, because you were saying starting sucks, first of all. Yeah, it really sucks.
Although it can be kind of exciting because you're like, ooh, that feels different. That's a different shape. Is that a thing?
I have too many follow-up questions to that question that I'm not going to touch. Oh. And I
don't know. Like I felt like one body basically for as long as I can remember at this point.
I think the analogy I heard about dating the other day was really good. Is that for guys, it's like being in a desert, and for women, it's like being in a swamp. So like for getting attention for guys feels really good, and for girls, it's like this is some dirty ass water. I don't want to be in here. So it's not fun.
That sounds perfectly reasonable. I understand that.
But when you stop doing the work, it stops growing, right? And the potential that it has, if you stop doing it, never reaches that potential. And so if you keep starting over, you never get to the good stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for a guy, I seem to remember liking the early stages, but also I was like young and untethered, and so that was. I think it was very different. I think it would be very different if I was trying to start over now.
See, this would be the good time for you to date because as a single dad, you have a lot more options. Single moms, it's a little different.
You have options as a single dad?
Yeah, because for a lot of them, like, oh man, he takes care of his kids. That's hot.
People love single dads, John. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I kept telling a friend of mine. I remember UJ. It was we lived like by the water in Toronto, and there was just all these like beautiful people, like men and women, just like beautiful people lived on the water. And Calvin. This is when Calvin was like 2, and so he was just toddling around, and he would just like go up to the most gorgeous women and just walk up to them and hold their hand. And
Nice.
I just called UJ and I was like, UJ, you got to get your ass here, man. And just go outside with him. He'll just walk up to anybody, and all you got to say is, "Oh no, it's look, it's not my son. I love kids so much. I just haven't found the right person yet. So, I'm looking after
Yep.
this is one of my good friend's kids, and so I wanted them to have a little bit of time, and I get to hang out with the kid. And hi, I'm UJ. Nice to meet you.
Yep, that would work.
Why are you not here?
Yep.
Oh man.
So, Ren, if you ever want to come to Toronto, then
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I've only been the one time, but I didn't bring a child along on my excursions throughout the city yet. So, Calvin's available.
Well, according to Shaquille O'Neal, Toronto is the most beautiful women in the world.
Really? That's what Shaq said?
Look it up. That's what Shaq said. Look it up. Look it up.
That's interesting.
Yeah, according to Shaq. Mm-hmm.
I
came here for a Raptors game, and apparently he was a bit impressed.
I love how we had such a great, deep, meaningful topic, and somehow we've ended where we always kind of end
to using children.
Yes.
Using
You
children
can't
as
hide who you are on a podcast.
No.
You can't hide who you are, man.
Using children as your life-size Tinder app.
Which, by the way, if you're on Tinder or any dating site, please don't have pictures of your child on there.
My God.
What attracts you to a photo on Tinder? I'm always interested in the psychology of those things.
I have no idea. Never been on it.
It doesn't have to be Tinder, like Tinder,
Yeah.
Bumble, like whatever.
It's like seeing someone that's genuinely happy in doing something that they love. Don't care for the shirtless pictures, don't care for the group photos or the superposed LinkedIn profile photo. But the natural, this probably isn't my best photo, but it's the real photo.
That's how I actually look. Yeah. It's so stupid to have a pose photo.
Operating heavy machinery.
Right. Yeah, obviously, full scuba gear.
I look for men who are looking genuinely happy operating heavy machinery, John. That's my answer.
Yeah, see Jones, helicopters. Yeah, I need construction vehicles next because Nate really likes construction vehicles right now. So
okay.
Standing on the hull of a 3/4 submerged submarine in a power pose is what
I'm scared of the water, so that would not work. So
really?
No boats, no submarines, no.
I feel like the sub's safer than the helicopter. I digress.
Do I have to recommend another episode? Is that what you said?
Probably so.
Yeah, you should do that.
Do something.
All right. I don't know. I'm just gonna pick one at random.
Let's sing up.
And spin the wheel, and we land on.
Well, take some time. Take some time.
Take your time, John.
Take up any time? No.
I'll ramble as you try to select.
Okay. No, I got one. We're good.
See, my ramblers get cut off this season.
So if you're looking for another episode to listen to, I'm going to recommend episode 34, Never Lose a Client Again. This is just a really good client-centric episode. A lot of very small, very specific tactical things of how to just offer a better service to your clients before they start with you, while they're training with you. And I think this is a great episode. So that's episode 34. Just scroll back in your app. Wherever you listen to this, episode 34, Never Lose a Client Again. And as always, thank you for listening.
Bye. Bye-bye.